Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I'll tell you about my experience at H&H Americas, a fiber and fabric trade show. Then I will show you my latest finished project and the mystery of why my gauge seems to be changing across multiple needle sizes. And then I'll give you a spinning update and my experiences working with Panama fleece, a type of sheep that is not from Panama, but was in fact developed here in the US. So let's get started. First thing I want to talk about is the event where I was a couple of weeks ago. So I recorded the previous Casual Friday almost a week early because I was going to be at the H&H Americas conference in Chicago and wouldn't be here to record Casual Friday. So that was fascinating, and I want to tell you about it. So the H&H Americas conference is a trade show, and it's for the fabric and fiber craft world. It's only been around here in the US since I think 2023 was their first year. Maybe it was 2022, and it was really small then, and it's gotten enormous since then. So it started in Germany. There's an H&H Cologne, and I've heard that maybe the one in Germany is just yarn, but the one here is yarn and fabrics. I was talking to a fabric store owner who's staying in the same hotel, and we had dinner one night and we chatted various times, kept running into each other. And she said there used to be a quilt show, I don't know if it was Tennessee or Kentucky, that's no longer going. And I knew that there used to be a trade show called TNNA. If I can figure out what the words stood for, I'll put it down at the bottom of the screen. And I remember when I used to teach at our local yarn shop, the owner there would go to TNNA she called it going to market. So seeing what all the new yarns and designers and patterns and notions and all that kind of stuff, and then she'd figure out what to buy for the shop. So that conference isn't going on anymore. So it looks like things have just evolved, and now H&H Americas has taken that place. I didn't really know if this was a place where I belonged, but I was really curious just to see what one of these trade shows was like. So even if I didn't really belong there, I was fascinated to see, kind of get that behind the scenes look of what goes on that a regular customer at a yarn shop or fabric shop wouldn't necessarily know about. When you buy your ticket, when you register for H&H, there's 3 different levels of registration. One is to just get a pass to go to the exhibition halls. So that would be like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You could go any or all of those days, and that's all you could get into. You could also see that every day there was a keynote speech you could go to, and then within the exhibit halls there was what they called the main stage, and they would have like panels, or they'd have different things going on there. And since you're in the exhibit hall, you could go to that if you wanted. I was trying to decide between the middle level and the high level. The middle level was a business pass, and it allowed you to take some of the courses that they labeled business courses. And then there was H&H University, which started actually on Tuesday, there were workshops all day, all different kinds of workshops. And those were, I think, mostly aimed at shop owners, but not necessarily. Somebody did tell me that there had been a creator track as well, and I didn't sign up for that. I don't know if I saw that and thought none of this really applies to me. A lot of content creators are on Instagram. They're influencers. You know, they're trying to make, sponsorship deals and all of that kind of thing. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to I'm trying to educate people, knitters particularly, about knitting techniques, or in the case of Casual Friday, what's going on in my crafting, knitting, yarn-based life. But I'm not trying to sell things to people. I'm not making those collaborations with companies. So I think that maybe was why I wasn't interested in that. There were some business workshops I was interested in that were aimed at content creators, and specifically about online education. And so I did take those classes. Those were on Wednesday. So Tuesday was really aimed at H&H University people, but there was this kind of happy hour party on Tuesday night that I did get invited to as a content creator. But I think it was mostly like H&H University people maybe were there. I don't really understand it, but they had hors d'oeuvres and an open bar. And so I went, and I didn't know they were going to have food and beverages, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to go to this particular party because of some of the activities they said were going on, which I did not see at all, especially given that everybody was there. I did meet some really interesting people, though. I just sat down at a table. There was 2 women there, a middle-aged woman and a young woman, and I could tell they were related, probably a mother-daughter, and we started chatting. It turns out they own a yarn shop together. They opened it 6 months ago, so this is was their first time at H&H. And the mother asked me, what's your name? And I said, Roxanne, and she goes, I'm Roxanne. So there were two Roxannes. Neither one of us ever runs into another Roxanne, so that was fun. And then another woman sat down at our table in between the two of us. We were chatting with her, and I looked at her badge, and under her name, it said, Welcome Blanket. And I said, what is that? And is it like baby blanket thing or something? She's like, no, it's a volunteer organization that makes 40 by 40 inch blankets for refugees and immigrants. And the person who makes the blanket, it could be knit, crocheted, it could be quilted, it could be whatever, but it's handmade. And the person who makes it includes information about their own family's immigration or migration stories, however recent or long ago it was, and just welcoming these people to the country. Before they get distributed to specific people, they'll have a group of blankets going around and being shown in museums and other places, letting people know about this project. And then there's, you can read the notes that people have written to the refugees or immigrants of them telling their own stories. I took some pictures of some of those because this woman, her name was Jana, this is their first year having a booth. I think she'd been to H&H before, but this is the first year that she was at a booth. And I just thought it was so interesting, and I made sure that I knew about it because these are kind of projects that I find wonderful. So that was Tuesday night. And then Wednesday, the exhibit hall was opening, but that was also the day I was going to be taking quite a few workshops. But I also wanted to start with the keynote for the day, and the topic was the state of the industry, and it was going to be a panel of people. But before it started, the Craft Industry Alliance, which is an organization I'd never heard of, and someone suggested to me that I should join it at least for a year so I could understand. It's not associated with any particular company. It's just, an alliance of people in the business in all different ways. But they give out what are called the Golden Scissors Awards. They give these awards out in 5 different categories. There's emerging leader, innovation, lifetime achievement, social impact, and sustainability. So they would give a little bio about each person who was going to be receiving this award, and then they'd get these giant, very sharp pair of golden scissors that were engraved, get their picture taken. So they were introducing the person who's going to get the Social Impact Award, and it was Jana Zweiman, the woman that I had met the night before who is in charge of this welcome blanket. And as they were introducing and telling about it, they also mentioned casually that she was also the co-founder of the Pussy Hat Project back in 2017, in anticipation of the Women's March in January of that year. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the same person. That's amazing. I just thought that project, the Welcome Blanket, was really amazing. And I think they're doing a fundraiser right now. Somebody contacted them and said they would do up to $10,000 in matching funds until the end of May if you wanted to donate toward them. And that helps create kits and stuff for people who are going to be doing some of these projects, and those kinds of funds to help with things. So I did donate towards that so that my money would be doubled. And I'll leave a link down below. I think May still is going on for another 9 days if that's something that you're interested in. But I also leave a link just to the Welcome Blanket website to see if that is something that is of interest to you. So that was an amazing first evening in the introduction to just the keynote. So the business classes I took were aimed at content creators, specifically online education. And what I started to notice, and then somebody else affirmed that or pointed it out, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right, is that these classes were taught by people who have a business related to that. And, you know, they're basically also selling their business if that's something of interest to you. So a couple of those workshops were really good. And one of them was, you know, it's a way to get support if you're doing online classes, like to see if your idea or your outline or whatever is good, and you can talk to other people who are doing online education. Some of them, you know, have a platform for that kind of thing, which isn't something I'm going to be interested in because I use YouTube. I'm not going to use online education like to teach classes for my yarn shop or something. You know, I'm just not going to do that kind of a thing. But I thought they were really good resources, and they gave me some good things to think about. One of the classes that I took was just awful. It was like, oh, I do not like this. The theme that they all had was, you know, be authentic. You know, because people can smell inauthenticity a mile away. And the class that I didn't like, I kept thinking, if this is your authentic self, I don't like this authentic self of yours. So I'm not going to receive your information well because I just don't like what you were presenting. Whether it was authentic or not, I didn't like it. But it was interesting. I'm glad I took those classes. The exhibit hall was overwhelming. Before I went to H&H, I was just kind of looking at a list of the vendors so I'd get an idea of who's going to be there. And I kept scrolling and scrolling, and it was just on the A's. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how many people are there? There were 650 vendors or exhibitors there. And they were in this huge exhibit hall that had 290,000 square feet, which is bigger than most Costco's, and then adjoining to it was another exhibit hall, not as big, but adjoining to it. So basically it was like 2 Costco's. For you in the US who have been to a Costco, they're huge. And that's how big the exhibit hall was. But they did sort of keep certain categories in particular zones. So if you're looking for people like yarn companies or notions companies that were related to knitting, that was mostly in this one area. If you're looking for quilting, it was in this other area. If you're looking for notions, they were here. If you're looking for gigantic machines like long arm quilting machines or these really fancy embroidery machines, those were, you know, in a different area. And then interspersed, you might see things like the welcome blanket or, you know, other things like that. I kind of zoomed through on Wednesday just to get an idea, and then I sat down Wednesday night and thought about, well, what booths am I interested in seeing? Because those are companies that I use their products and you just kind of want to stop by their booths. Because I'm not a yarn shop. I'm not going to be buying or placing an order for anything. So I went through the different yarn companies, you know, that I like. And a lot of them, it was like, this is not that interesting to me. It's just, you know, it's like, okay, that's the yarn you sell, whatever. But there were a couple of booths that were very interesting to me. And a few that I walked by, I was like, did a double take. I'm like, oh, I know that product. I didn't realize that was here. I didn't think about it, and I wanted to go talk to them. A lot of these people are small businesses that are selling to other small businesses. And so you're talking to like the people who own the company. And that was really wonderful to be able to say, oh, I'm not a shop owner. I'm not buying anything here today. I'm not ordering anything, but I just want you to know how much I love your product and why, and I've talked about it on my YouTube channel, and then see what and then, you know, they're all excited and they're just showing me what their new things are. So that was really fun. And I will say, like Chalgu, who make interchangeable needles, was there. And I didn't intend to stop by their booth. I use their needles. They're the needles I tend to choose now if I need to buy new needles. My favorite needles are Signature Needle Arts, and they were discontinued a couple of years ago. It was a company in Wisconsin, which is the neighboring state, owned by a woman with a sheet metal company who is also a knitter, and that's how she started her company. They're my favorite needles. They're the needles I use first, and then if I need some other size or type of needle, I will get Chalgu. But in the flyer, when I first went and got my name badge and everything, they just had these tote bags hanging up. I'll show you. I hadn't been to a national conference of any kind in 20 years, and so the technology changes for like getting your badge are completely different. Like they emailed me a QR code and I just put it in this machine and it spit out my tag for my badge, and I just got the little lanyard and clipped it on. And then hanging from those same stands were these bags from Knit Pro, and they're just hanging there. And I'm like, can you just take these? And I took one. And it's a nice, it's like felted fabric or something. But there were a few little flyers and stuff in there, and I was thinking, I don't care about these. And I was flipping through them, and I stopped at one of them, and I'm like, what? And it was this right here, Signature Needle Arts 2.0. And I was like, what? And it's coming in late 2027. I don't even know if it said, it said it was Chalgu. And I was like, oh my God, I knew that the woman who had retired was willing to sell her company if somebody wanted to buy it, but I didn't know anybody had. And so Chalgu has bought the rights, at least to the name and the technology, but they're going to be changing it and innovating it. So I stopped by the Chalgu booth, and there's a man there, Chinese man, spoke very good English, and asked me if he could help me. And I'm like, oh, I'm not a shop owner. I just heard that you're going to come out with Signature Needle Arts, that you are going to be producing them. And he said, yeah. And he explained what was happening. And I said how much I loved those, and I knew a lot of people are really sad. And he asked me if I had them, and I said I had the original straight needles, and then when they came out with the circulars, I bought those, and they were fixed length, and then they came out with their interchangeable. And the complaint that a lot of people had about the Signature interchangeables was that you could buy different cord lengths for a specific tip. Like you had a 4mm tip, you could buy cords that would make different lengths, but those cords did not work with other sizes. That was just how their model worked. But I had the fixed length circulars. They were all 32-inch circulars, which is what I use for everything. And what he said was they're going to change it so that the interchangeables will function the same way the other Chalgu interchangeables work. So the same cords, so it'll be the same, like the Chalgus have a range where this cable works with this size range and this cable works with this size range, because they go really tiny and really big. And then you can have adapters if you like the thinner cords, but you want to use them with one of the bigger needles. So like I like the swivel 360 cables, and because they're so thin and so flexible, I prefer those over those red ones. Those are just a little too stiff for my taste. I like the mini cables, and I like the swivel cables. But I'd be able to use those. But I just thought that was fascinating. I don't know that I'll be buying any, except maybe just to try them out, because I have a whole set. But I thought that was fascinating. And I thought, it's the company that, after Signature, I like Chalgu's, and now they're both going to be offered by the same company. So would I go again? I don't know. I'm really glad I went this time. I don't know that it would be worth it for me to go again. If I went again, I would probably do it a little differently and stay a shorter amount of time. I just didn't know what was happening all of the different days. I'll certainly look at what they're offering next year and see if it's something I'm interested in. I'm really glad I went. I'm super glad I got to meet so many interesting people, shop owners, designers, people who just like saw me and knew me, like, oh, I love your channel. I support you on Ko-fi. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice. There was a woman at the Welcome Blanket, I was volunteering at the Welcome Blanket booth, saw me when I walked by and called me over. You know, that was really, really fun and unexpected that I would get recognized there. But it was really fun to talk to people, to find out why they're there, and just to see how everything works in our industry, when usually all I know is they go into a yarn shop and they have yarns there and different notions there, and I don't know how they decided to carry those yarns, or how they found out about them, or anything else. So I am glad I went. Don't know that I would go again. While I was at H&H, I took my typical project for traveling, which is socks. Normally I'll start a new pair of socks when I'm waiting at the gate for my flight, but I was already working on this long pair that I've shown you the past couple of times. So I finished up a sock while I was there, and so I started my next pair of socks, which I have finished. And it's this pair of socks right here. This is using some of the Opal 20th anniversary Rainforest yarns that I bought this past winter. 20 years ago, when I was a new sock knitter, I loved the Rainforest collection that Opal had. Some of the proceeds, they never say how much, like what percentage, but some of the proceeds go towards saving the rainforest. Some of my favorite socks are from that era 20 years ago, and they're wearing out, so I was really delighted that I could buy some of the yarn that I had used before to replace those. This pair is not replacing those in terms of identically. I just really love these bright, bright colors. After H&H, I went into Chicago for the weekend. My daughter Sophia lives there, and we did a bunch of different things, which is really fun. But one of the things I wanted to do was go to the yarn shop that she considers her main yarn shop, but it's really far. It's a far drive for her. It's called Wool and Company, and it's a company that has a huge online presence. I've ordered from them before because they have everything. I just hadn't known that they had a brick and mortar store until Sophia started knitting. And it's like an hour to hour and a half drive for her, because it's Chicago traffic is terrible. It doesn't matter what time of day or what day of the week it is terrible. So it took us about an hour and a half. We went with a friend of hers and then met her friend's mom there, who's also a knitter, and spent time. I just wanted to see what a shop like that looked like. It's huge. It used to be in some other location, and they have this newer location that is next to a cornfield. That's how far out in the middle of nowhere it is. But it was busy. They were running some kind of workshop that Cascade was there to tell people about color theory. And I just went around just to see what they had. I didn't really have anything in mind that I needed. But I knew that there was a couple of things they carried that I thought I might want to get. One of the things I knew they carried was Langeville sock yarn in the solid colors. I'd gotten a handful of colors when we were in the Netherlands last fall, and I thought, well, this is my opportunity to get some more. And so I just picked things that I thought might go with like some of the Rainforest yarns, or some of the Opal is also doing a 20-year anniversary of, what's his name? Hunter Tvasser, the Hunter Tvasser sock yarns. And so I bought a bunch of those. And so I just bought a handful of solids. And one of the colors that I bought, I thought went really well with this. So I used it for the heels. And that allowed me to just use the color part straight through without having to break yarn to wind off after knitting the heel. You know, if I want everything to match up, sometimes I break the yarn up. So I have a nice substantial amount left over that's going to be good to knit a baby hat for my daughter's boss, who's pregnant with her second child. And my daughter's in a creative field, so her boss is creative and loves handmade things and putting handmade things on her children. And so I'm like, ooh, I don't know anybody having a baby, so I'm going to knit some things for this baby. Would your boss mind? No, she's not going to mind. So I'll make a fun, brightly colored baby hat with the leftovers from this pair. This is just my standard vanilla sock that I make. For me, this is cuff down. I use what's called a plain heel. It's been my favorite heel the past couple of years because it's like an afterthought heel, but you knit it when you get to there, and you can adjust the size of it so that I can accommodate my really high instep at this point, the way that I can add stitches, and so I can get a really good fit with that. Now, I noticed something when I was knitting this pair of socks. So this pair was toe up. What I noticed was that my gauge has changed in the past few months when I'm knitting socks. Now, when I was knitting this pair, I thought it might just be this yarn because I'd never used this particular brand before. For years, I would knit at 9 stitches per inch with like a 4-ply fingering weight yarn that has a lot of yardage and 100 grams, like 460 or 70 yards and 100 grams. I could get 9 stitches per inch on a US 0, which is a 2 millimeter needle. And that was true for years and years and years. And in the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or so, I noticed that my gauge was changing. It was getting a little bit looser on those smaller needles. I could go down another needle size to a 00 or a 1.75 millimeter, but it hurt my hands. So I was just living with 8.5 stitches. It's still firm enough for a pair of socks. I just change my stitch count, you know, if I need to do that in order to accommodate that difference. But what I noticed with the sock yarn was I was getting 9 stitches per inch. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Well, with this pair of socks, I was doing cuff down, and I don't mind if my leg is a little bit looser. You know, they'll still stay up, and so I could use my standard 64 stitches for my sock leg and have it be 8.5 stitches per inch, and it would still feel just nice. But I would have to probably reduce my stitch count when I get to the heel in order to make the heel snug enough and make I like the foot to be snugger, and so I would need to go down in stitches. Well, I noticed as I was knitting the leg, that's weird, I'm getting 9 stitches per inch. Now, this is Opal. I haven't used Opal in a number of years because I hadn't been able to find it in local stores. I always used to get 9 stitches per inch, so I thought, well, maybe that's just a thing I could do with Opal. And when I use some of the other yarns like Regia or Online Sock or whatever that I've used in the past few years more often, maybe that it's just that yarn that I need 8.5 stitches per inch. But they should all be the same, at the same yardage. It didn't make sense. Well, then I'm using the Lang for the heel, 9 stitches per inch. And over the winter, I knit several pairs of socks for my college friends using Lang Javol, and I was getting 8.5 stitches per inch. So I'm thinking, what has changed? So I started knitting this pair of socks at the end, like March 21st is what my Ravelry page says. You know, what could be changing? And I realized I started doing strength training in about a month earlier. So you know, it's getting older. I don't want to lose muscle mass. I'm trying to build muscle, trying to retain bone density. And I could not make myself do strength training on my own. So I found this place that's like ideal for me. It's twice a week. It's 20 minutes each time. They have these machines that show you, you know, what your goal is based on what your previous thing that you could do, and you're trying to push, you know, to match. It's like a game. I'll put a link down below to our like local TV station went to one of these places, and you can kind of see what these machines are like. But they totally, you know, make you go to failure in this short amount of time, and they end with cardio that is this high intensity interval training. Which is really good, so you're like pedaling as hard as you can with this resistance. The harder you pedal, the more resistance for 15 seconds, then you get 30-second break and then another 15 seconds, you know. So you get this huge workout in 20 minutes. And so I've been doing that. I'd been doing that for a month before I started knitting these socks, and it has continued. And then I started another hat. I started a hat for my daughter's boss's baby. I've got some yarn at Wool and Company. I'm like, oh, I'll make a cupcake hat. And I was through the ribbing and into, you know, the main part of the hat and about to start the decreases. And I thought, I'll just check my gauge. And my gauge was firmer than I would have expected on those needles. And I'm like, has my gauge changed also for like other needle sizes? And so I think what's happening is that maybe over time as I aged, you know, my hands were, you know, getting a little weaker or less arthritic or more arthritic. And then with strength training, I have to hold on to these bars and like push or pull or do whatever, that my grip strength is also improving and my endurance. And so it could be that I just have engaged these muscles more. And so I can work at the tension that I used to work at. And, you know, I haven't lost that strength that made me loosen up, maybe. So what this means is I'm going to have to keep checking my gauge. Like certain types of yarns, I know how, you know, what gauge and what needle I need. I know what they are, and now I don't. So that's really interesting. But I can tell that I'm stronger. My core is better. You know, all kinds of things are improved, and I'm really happy about that. I did not expect that an activity I do while I'm sitting that the strength training would have an effect. I'm curious if anybody else has noticed anything like this, if your gauge has changed because of building strength or losing strength. So I'd be interested to know if anybody else has experienced this, but I'll keep you updated because I think this is a fascinating thing. And before, when I loosened up, I'd only loosened up with the really tiny needles. The mid-range needles hadn't changed, so that was why I was surprised when I was using a 4mm or a US 6 needle that something had changed. So I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I will continue to to do swatching before every project, regardless of what I think I know about my knitting, and we'll see what happens. I have a question for those of you who speak German. This colorway is called Turteln in der Geisterbahn, I think is the name of it. I'll put it on the screen. And I've gotten several different translations for that, none of which make sense. The picture of the animal that these are based on are two little tropical birds. But I don't understand what the name of this colorway has to do with that. So one of the translations is turtles in the ghost train. Another is canoodling in the haunted house. And then there's also cooing, and that could be either in the haunted house or in the ghost train. I don't understand. So if anybody understands what that phrase actually means and knows what it might mean in English and what that has to do with these two tropical birds, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about spinning and what's been going on in my spinning life. In March, I went on this spinning retreat in in Washington. So it was on the San Juan Island in Washington. It was with Deb Robeson, who wrote this book here, the Fleece and Fiber Source Book. It's like primary resource for, you know, anytime you come across a new breed or you're going to be using a new breed of wool, or other animal fiber, you look it up and kind of see what she has to say about it. Or if you just want to know more about the breed itself or what kind of wool it is it long wool, is it medium, is, you know, whatever. They've got samples of hand spun, a little piece woven, a little piece knitted, so you can kind of see how things were done. In some cases they'll card some of it, some cases they'll comb some of it in different ways so you can see what things look like. It's a wonderful book. So when I was at this retreat, she mentioned on one of the days, she said, oh, if anybody's interested, they're going to be shearing the Panama sheep this weekend. So if you are interested in getting a fleece, you can email Ann Jensen. And then the second time she mentioned it, and because people are like, and the second time she mentioned it, I said, what? I've never heard of Panama sheep. What is that? And so she ended up mailing us all a link to this handout that she had created. Her handouts basically are like, an entry in this kind of book. Color photos, history, diagrams, explanations, all, amazing. When she was researching this book, she and Carol Acarius, who was the co-writer, they spent 4 years, I think, writing this book, and they looked and looked and looked for Panama sheep, and they couldn't find any. And some of the sources about this said that the registry book was closed, there weren't any, and that it was extinct. That was one of her sources. And she put in this book, she had it on this, I think it's on the same page as Columbia, which is another breed that has a similar history. And she said, if anybody knows of a source for Panama, I'd love to hear about it. And so a few years ago, somebody emailed her and said, oh yeah, I know somebody who raises Panama sheep, and put her in contact with F. Jensen Livestock, I think is the name of it. He was the man who started his flock 100 years ago, and maybe it's his grandson now is running it, and then his grandson's granddaughter is Ann Jensen. She's a spinner, and she decided a few years ago to see if hand spinners or knitters would be interested in products from their wool rather than just selling it to the wool pool. There were people interested. So this is not an easy to come by, breed. And so I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna buy one. I tried to split it with somebody, and because they're big, they're 6-7 pounds is what they were going to be, and I'm like, I don't need 6 or 7 pounds. But my friend wanted to buy one for herself, so I thought, well, I'll buy it, and then when I go to spinning group, I can see if anybody wants to buy a pound of it off of me, so I can get rid of half of it that way. And I was able to do that last week. I want to just tell you a little bit about this breed and then show you the different states of it. So early in the 20th century, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, was interested in developing sheep breeds that would be good for the western ranges. So in the western part of the country is where the biggest sheep farms are, and a lot of those are Columbia. And Columbia was developed by a university. Most of the new breeds that were developed in the U.S. were developed by universities, and that's how they were done. But there was one that was developed at about the same time in response to this need for developing breeds in the western ranges. It was a guy named James Laidlaw, who was a private citizen, and so the Columbia was developed using a Rambouillet, which is a French Merino, Rambouillet ewe, and crossing it with a Lincoln long wool. So you have a fine wool being crossed with a long wool. And that was what was being done at the university. And then James Laidlaw took a Lincoln long wool ewe and crossed it with a Rambouillet ram, so the opposite, and was working on that. And then somewhere around, I think right before World War I, there was this Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, and he took some sheep there and then decided to name the breed after this exhibition. So they're not from Panama. It was just named after this Panama Pacific Exposition. And so for those of you not in the United States, we have these vast areas out in the West that aren't really populated, and that's, it's a lot of livestock grazing areas. So this particular farm, F. Jensen Livestock, in the summertime, they have their sheep up in Idaho. And then they take the traditional trail routes, they take the sheep down by the traditional trail routes to Utah for the winter for grazing. So it used to be these were these old trail routes. Well, now there's like towns, little towns there, and so because it's traditional trail routes, they close the roads. People get their lawn chairs and set them up on the side of the road to watch all of these sheep come through. So one of the issues that I was told by Anne when I emailed her saying I was interested in a fleece, she said, well, we're having a horrible drought in Utah, so the fleeces are greasier, a little greasier than normal. And they're going to be dirty. She's like, and she must have skirted them really well. So there's not like poop and stuff on them, but they're dirty. I paid for 6 pounds of it, and I, finally pulled the whole bag out of the box. Had opened it up and was pulling quantities out to scour. And I saw the card that she'd put underneath the bag that said it was 6.8 pounds. So she sent me more than I'd paid for because it was going to be greasy and it was going to get less yield out of it. And I scoured the first pound, and the result was like 10 point something ounces. So I lost about 40% from the lanolin, and that first pound was so dirty. I normally do 2 rinses. I did 4 rinses, and it was like you had swept up your garage and gotten that kind of gritty dirt and just had poured it in there. It was that kind of dirt at the bottom of the bucket. The next time I scoured, I just did 8 ounces, and this was from a different part of the fleece that I think just wasn't as dirty. I only had to do 2 rinses. But I want to show you what the wool looked like before scouring, after scouring, and then some of the samples that I spun with it. And also, my friend who wanted to buy a whole fleece, she also had asked, and do you have any like prepared roving or any other, Panama products that I could use to compare? And she's like, yeah, I have roving. And so Shelly bought like 4 ounces of the roving, and then at Spinning Group, she let me I think I took like half an ounce or something like that, because she just wanted to compare the prepared roving with what she was going to prepare from her own fleece, which is kind of what we were doing at our retreat. We would, if there was a commercially milled preparation available, we would start with that and then go through the fleeces we had and prepare them with hand processing in different ways to see how that experience was different. Now, if you're interested in trying out the Panama, she does, the F. Jensen Livestock does have an Etsy shop, and there's some roving in it, not a whole lot, there's some. And then there's another person who has an online store where she sells yarns that are from interesting breeds, like things that you wouldn't find in the yarn shops. And she does have some Panama yarn that has spun up, I think, from their wool when they are doing their shearing, and pulls aside the ones that she thinks would be good for hand spinners. And then she has some that she must be sending to a mill to be turned into roving, and then maybe selling some of those to the person who has the yarn, or maybe I don't know how it works, but that roving and that yarn are from their wool. So let's go to the overhead, and I can show you all of the different stages of this Panama. So here is the wool. This is the raw fleece, and you can see how dirty it is at the ends. And it doesn't actually look like it's that dirty. When you look at it, you're like, oh, that's not that dirty. It's got a little bit. But then you wash it, and and it's like the lanolin has gone out, the wool opens up, and then all of these little speckles are just stuck to the wool. And it's like a very springy wool. What I did in my second scouring was kind of take some of this wool and kind of pick it open a little bit to open it up a little bit more. A lot of dirt kind of fell out of it because of that. And so I thought, oh, this is going to be a lot cleaner. And it did wash a lot cleaner, partly, I think, because I used less wool in that wash water, that amount of water. But partly because it might have been just a cleaner part of the fleece. So you can see that there's all this, and it's just really springy and boingy. So last night I went to a maker's night at our, so the American Swedish Institute has a monthly maker's night, and there's all kinds of people there. There's like wood carvers, people doing embroidery, somebody knitting, somebody doing knot binding. It was really interesting. And I brought my bag of the fleece that I'd scoured so far, and I was just picking it open. So I was just picking it like this, separating it out, because eventually I will card this. And then you can already see how much dirt just drops here. It was a huge pile of dirt at my feet. And so then I ended up with this, which is a lot cleaner. There's still some stuff in there. So when I card this, more dirt will come out. When I spin it, more will fall off. It just keeps doing, but hand picking it really helps to clean it up. I mean, when you look at it compared to this, you can just see how much of the dirt comes out. So I carded some and I spun it, and I did just, it was like, this is like the first, I look like a beginning spinner. It was just like really uneven, and it was, you know, thicker than probably I would like. But watch what happens. Look how boingy this is. Look how stretchy this is, how elastic this is. It's crazy. You just don't see yarn that does this. So then I carded some more, and I spun it a little finer. I did a 2-ply and a 3-ply. So these are nicer yarns. But again, they are so boingy. Now, one of the women I had sold, I think 8 ounces to at my spinning group, she had carded, or not carded, she had combed hers and then spun it using short forward draw, which is creating a worsted spun yarn. I was creating a woolen spun yarn. I carded it, and then I used a long draw method. And so hers had some stretch to it, but because of the method that she used to prepare the fibers and spin it, didn't have as much. And so somebody in my spinning group was saying, how are you going to knit with that yarn? How are you going to deal with the elasticity, that kind of stretch? And I hadn't even thought about it, but I will have to do some sampling with needle, with you know, knitting up some swatches to see if this behaves kind of like a chainette yarn behaves, where sometimes these really stretchy yarns, you need to use a little bit larger needle than you would normally use, because as it's going around the needle, it's stretched out, and then when it comes off the needle, it relaxes back into the shape. And so that might be a strategy I use. Somebody else said this would be really good for a hat because it would be stretchy, but it would then pull back into shape. So it'll be interesting to see if it does that. Now, one of the things that I would like to do is compare the Panama to the Columbia, because they started with, you know, the same types of sheep, but, you know, reversing the ewe and the lamb, and they were developed for the same kinds of areas of the country. And so climate and landscape can really affect how breeds develop and what they select for as they're breeding. In Colombia, even though there's tons of it out there, it's the huge sheep farms, and so it's kind of hard for me to figure out where am I going to get some Colombia from like a local small flock. And somebody mentioned that Clemis and Clemis has their good, clean fleece, that they had some Columbia. So that should be coming this weekend. And it's washed. I won't have to scour it myself. And then I'll be able to do some side-by-side comparisons and see if they have some of the same qualities or how they might be different from each other. If you'd like to learn more about Panama sheep, there is an article from Spin-Off magazine down below, which includes a video about this flock of sheep where I got my wool, and you can see them moving the sheep on the trail as well. I'll leave a link to that down below. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.